As responders and community members, our hearts are heavy, but we know it can't compare to how his family is feeling and what they are going through.
A 2-year-old boy was happily playing in his backyard out in Oregon when he suddenly vanished, and a volunteer diver found Dane Paulsen's small body in a river 2 miles from his home. Now his own father faces a criminal charge. The question now is, was Dane's disappearance and death just a horrible tragedy or something else? We're going to be sitting down with a former child abuse prosecutor to analyze the case. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. By the way, I have to say this, as we're covering all these stories here on Sidebar, I will tell you, staying on top of the news today is so important. The problem is, with all the media bias, who knows what to believe, right? That's why I want to introduce you to our sponsor, Straight Arrow News, okay? Straight Arrow News is a personalized news platform that gives readers fact-based journalism to inform and build trust. Its media mist tool, it shows readers the headlines that are not seen in mainstream outlets. It provides useful commentary that cuts through all of that sensational spin. And their site and app points out the bias with their media landscape tool to group sources by political leaning for full transparency. So if you're ready for a better way to get the news, go to san.com/sidebar, or just click the link in my description. This is Straight Arrow News. You skip the drama, you get the facts, and welcome back to trustworthy journalism. In March of this year, the parents of Dane Paulsen made a terrifying discovery. The 2-year-old, who they thought was just playing in the backyard, was gone. The area where Dane's family lived, Lincoln County, Oregon, includes a Native American reservation, the Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians. It's a heavily wooded area. It's beautiful, but it's also dangerous. It's potentially deadly if someone were to get lost in there, and especially dangerous for a child on their own. Now, Dane was first reported missing on March 1st. It's a Saturday at around 4:30 p.m. This is according to the Lincoln County, Oregon Sheriff's Office. According to Dane's parents, Marian Braccia and Shemet Jackson, he was last seen wearing a gray fuzzy hoodie with ears, black pants, and blue and white shoes. Over the course of 10 days, law enforcement members and volunteers, they poured in from all over the area to search the land and the Siletz River, looking for any sign of Dane. The sheriff's office says that it followed up on nearly 200 tips and leads. Family members had told investigators that Dane, he liked being around water, but he couldn't swim. Little boy. And it wasn't until March 11th that Dane's small body was discovered by a volunteer diver around 3 miles downriver from his family's property. This is according to details that were released at a news conference. During that presser, the Lincoln County Sheriff's Public Information Officer, Jess Palma, provided updates to reporters after Dane's body was found, going over different parts of the investigation and also highlighting important pieces of evidence.
On Saturday, March 1st, 2025, at approximately 4:25 p.m., the Lincoln County Sheriff's Office was notified of a missing 2-year-old male, Dane Paulsen. At that time of his disappearance, Dane was reported to be playing in the yard of his residence, located near milepost 21 on Siletz River Highway in Siletz, Oregon. Upon notification of Dane's disappearance, members of the Lincoln County Sheriff's Office, Siletz Valley Fire, Oregon State Police, Newport Police, Lincoln City Police, and the Lincoln County Sheriff's Office Search and Rescue Team responded to the scene. Investigators interviewed Dane's parents, and emergency personnel immediately began searching the residential property and surrounding area. This search included the family home, yard, and structures, neighboring properties, nearby roads, rough terrain, including rough forested areas with thick, dense brush, and portions of the Siletz River and riverbanks. In addition to ground searches, aerial drones with thermal imaging also allowed responders to widen the search.
Now, to be clear, authorities determined that this investigation was pointing more and more towards the water, right? The Siletz River, specifically. And it was near the water's edge that investigators found a critical piece of evidence: Dane's shoe print.
The Lincoln County Sheriff's Office and partnering agencies had watercraft searching the river beginning the morning of Sunday, March 2nd through March 11th, when Dane was recovered. Divers began searching the river on Monday, March 3rd, and remained active through Tuesday, March 4th. Search leaders were coordinating additional resource requests to ensure divers could resume underwater searches in the coming days. After 3 full days of search and investigation, all evidence was pointing to the Siletz River. This evidence included the surrounding land being as thoroughly searched as possible, leads from scent tracking dogs, which tracked Dane's scent down to the river, and shoe prints comparable to Dane's size found down at the river's edge. On March 4th, this evidence led responders to primarily focus search efforts on the Siletz River. Investigators continued to pursue leads by interviewing, investigating, and following up on community tips. Throughout this investigation and search, our teams utilized additional personnel with specialized training and equipment. During the search and investigation, diver Juan Herita with Angel's Recovery Dive Team connected with Dane's family. Using information provided by our team and with the help of a local river guide, Juan began his search. On March 11th, at approximately 11:13 a.m., Juan located a small child in the river downstream of where officials had paused their search. The Lincoln County Medical Examiner's Office was notified and responded to the scene. They transported Dane to the State Medical Examiner's Office, where an autopsy was completed on March 12th. Results from this autopsy confirmed Dane's cause of death was drowning. There was no evidence that indicated additional trauma to his body. At this time, no criminal charges have been filed regarding the death of Dane Paulsen.
And then you had the sheriff himself, Sheriff Adam Shanks, address why the department's own search teams out on the water, why they didn't find Dane.
Dane was found in the Siletz River approximately 3 miles downstream from the family's property. This area of river had been surface searched several times by multiple watercraft operated by our first responders as well as community volunteers. Daily boat operations continued through the day Dane was found. Additionally, our initial dive operations were conducted over a 2-day period on March 3rd and 4th, 2 days after Dane's disappearance. 22 divers from multiple sheriff's offices and search and rescue teams had searched an approximate 2-mile stretch of the Siletz River, beginning from the property where Dane went missing, moving downstream. These areas were determined to be the highest probability areas, meaning they were deemed the most likely place Dane would be found based on several factors such as river height, flow and speed of current, the time frame Dane had been missing, and body composition. On March 11, 2025, Juan Herita with Angel's Recovery Dive Team arrived on scene as a volunteer to assist in the search for Dane. Sheriff's Office Sheriff's Office personnel briefed Juan's boat operator, a local river guide, on the areas divers had already searched. Using this information, the river guide escorted Juan onto the river, where he began searching areas downstream from where divers had thoroughly combed. Juan located Dane underwater approximately 3 miles from the point of his disappearance.
Now, Sergeant Nick Vale reiterated how fortunate the department was to have the help of so many search members, which allowed them to cover just an incredible amount of ground.
We're humbled by the servant spirit displayed by each of these partners. They traveled from their communities to help find a missing piece of ours as they searched, logging nearly 700 miles on foot and covering extensive lengths along the Siletz River. Detectives combed through hundreds of community tips, from in-person contacts and social media contacts, messages, and posts. Law enforcement conducted hundreds of interviews, including those of Dane's family and members of this community. Investigators continue to finalize documentation in the preparation of this case for review by the Lincoln County District Attorney's Office, which is a standard practice in all death investigations. Resolved as we were to find Dane, our investigation and the evidence available all pointed to the Siletz River. River searches such as this are dynamic, rapidly evolving, and dangerous for all parties involved. Complications such as water temperature, the speed of a current, fixed or moving debris influence search operations on a continuous basis. Further variables, such as the size of a body, the length of submersion, and clothing worn, all impact the timeline that a person may resurface. In this case, we utilized multiple water resources, including surface water searchers, water scent canines, aerial and underwater drones, underwater sonar, and divers to plan daily search operations on the Siletz River in hopes of bringing Dane home to his family. On the day of March 11th, Dane was located in about 8 feet of water in the Siletz River by Juan Heredia of the Angels Recovery Dive Team. He was about 1 mile from our most recent dive operation. Juan is the embodiment of the same spirit of service that has humbled us over our 10-day operation. His compassion for others, his willingness to give of himself to our community, is what helped bring closure to Dane's family. On behalf of the Lincoln County Sheriff's Office, the investigations and search teams, and our community, I offer our sincerest gratitude. Thank you all for helping to bring Dane home.
Investigators referred to Juan Heredia several times during their news conference back in March. He's the founder of Angels Recovery Dive Team, which describes itself as compassionate underwater recovery services for families in need. They do an incredible service. According to an August interview with Jefferson Public Radio in Oregon, since founding the organization last year, Heredia has helped recover more than a dozen bodies. He spoke with outlet KOIN after the discovery, saying that he was actually in Mexico when he heard about the search for Dane Paulsen. He says he hopped in his truck, drove 12 hours to get to Oregon and help out. Heredia told reporters that he was only in the water for around 2 hours when he spotted the boy's shoes. Since then, Heredia has posted on his Facebook page that he visited with Dane's family, paid his respects at a small memorial. He wrote, "I came to visit baby Dane and his mom and dad, forever my new family. God bless this beautiful family. R.I.P. my baby Dane." And after the toddler's body was found, there was an autopsy that was performed. And the medical examiner's office concluded that Dane drowned. And at the time, law enforcement said there was, quote, no evidence to suggest criminal actions are involved. But then there was a change. The case was referred to the district attorney's office for review. And on Thursday, October 16th, the case was presented to a grand jury who decided there was enough evidence to indict Aaron Paulsen, again, Dane's dad, on 1 count of child neglect. That is a Class A misdemeanor. The DA's office said in a statement, quote, "After deliberating and voting privately, a grand jury returns a true bill charging an individual with a crime only if at least 5 out of 7 jurors determine there is sufficient evidence to warrant a conviction." Now, court records reviewed by Oregon news outlet KATU say that Paulsen, quote, "custody or control of Dane Paulsen did unlawfully and with criminal negligence leave Dane Paulsen, a child under the age of 10 years, unattended in or at a place for such a period of time as was likely to endanger the health or welfare of said child." And other than their short statement, the DA's office has been very tight-lipped about the reasoning behind the neglect charge, which makes this kind of curious, right? What do they have? Paulsen, he was arrested. His bail was set at $20,000. He's scheduled to be arraigned today, actually, November 3rd. So to talk about the case, whether charges are really warranted here, whether they make sense, what might be going on, I want to bring in practice professor of law and former child abuse prosecutor Marian Braccia. Thank you so much for coming on. It's always good to see you. Experts, community volunteers, they search this area around Dane's home, okay? So there's this investigation that's going on at the family property, too, to try to understand what happened here. And we don't have all the answers. There's seems to be tight-lipped about the investigation. But generally speaking, if you're talking about this kind of case, a neglect case, an alleged neglect case, an abuse case, at a home, which is different than any kind of potential crime scene because you would imagine there would be evidence of the players, right? It's like you would talk about domestic violence cases. You would imagine a wife or a husband or a boyfriend or girlfriend, their DNA might be places. Same thing with the child and the caretaker. But what kind of evidence are investigators looking for at a property like this?
Well, if the lead charge is criminal negligence, and that really is what the standard is for this neglect of child charge, the criminal negligence charge has to show a failure to be aware of a substantial or unjustifiable risk. That's really the legal language there. And so investigators would be looking for a known risk that was known to Dane's father, to his parents, to his caregivers, that was then disregarded. And in disregarding that risk, that's what our community standards or the Oregon community standards would consider unjustifiable. So that's really what they're looking for. They want to see what circumstances would have created or presented that risk that was then disregarded by the caregivers.
Can I expand upon that? Is it also possible that they might be looking of evidence of other neglect, right? You know, a stronger case if they could say, we have evidence throughout this home The child maybe, I'm just thinking about this right now. I'm not saying these are the allegations, but in a typical case, would they say, I have evidence that even before this episode happened, there's evidence the child wasn't fed, the child wasn't bathed, the child wasn't, cleaned, whatever it may be, to build a stronger case, a pattern. And is that evidence that would be allowed in a case like this?
Well, my answer to a lot of the legal questions, as you know, is it depends. But yes, the answer to your first question about whether or not that course of conduct evidence would be helpful to investigators to building a case about exactly that, a course of conduct, to show that there was more than just one instance of neglect, that this was the state of the child's existence, that he was constantly neglected or uncared for. So yes, of course, they would be looking for that. And would it be admitted or would it be admissible for a fact finder to hear? That's going to be up to a judge in a determination pre-trial to consider what other evidence might be presented against the criminal defendant that would go to show not just that, oh, there were bad things that happened previously in this child's life or bad things that may have even been inflicted on this child by his caregivers, but that these other circumstances go to show some element, go to prove some element of what the defendant is currently being charged with. Was there a showing of intent, of plan, of preparation, of some absence of mistake? That's what the rules of evidence do allow for, and not just for a showing of propensity.
What about a parent or caregiver's reaction? Look, everybody reacts to things differently, right? But I wonder, are there red flags that prosecutors, investigators would be looking for when it comes to a caregiver or parent's reaction to their child disappearing?
Absolutely. And that comes under the jury instructions for what's known as consciousness of guilt. And so we'd want to see how the criminal defendant in this case reacted, what he did or didn't do at the time. A lot of times in other kinds of cases, when there's flight, when someone leaves the jurisdiction or even runs from police at the time of their apprehension, that flight is considered consciousness of guilt. And so we're always considering the reaction of the accused when facing the charges, of course, not trampling on constitutional rights, not looking at whether or not they made a statement or waived their absolute right to remain silent. But yes, in those reactions that, again, our community would consider reasonable or unreasonable, did they behave like a guilty person? That's what the jury instructions allow the fact finders to take into consideration.
Now, Dane's mom, Shemette Jackson, spoke with KPTV just a few days ago in her first TV interview and basically said she believes there is more to the story. She swears that Aaron had nothing to do with their son's death. So according to Shemette, she had apparently walked out of the home to check on her father, who lived in a trailer in their backyard, and she told KPTV that Dane came outside to find her. Quote, Dane goes out of the back door and comes straight to the trailer. I hear him. He goes, bippity boop boop. And I was like, oh, Bubby, I'm coming. And then he laughs so oddly, like laughing like somebody's tickling him. And then it's silence. And I was like, Dane, Dane. And she says when she came out of the trailer, Dane was gone. She also claimed to outlet KATU that Aaron had just gotten home when Dane disappeared, that he had nothing to do with him vanishing. So if that's the case, or at least that's what you're hearing here, Professor, the big question a lot of people are asking is, why is Aaron charged? I mean, we don't have an answer to that question officially from officials. What stands out to you?
What stands out to me, quite frankly, is the lack of information that's being provided by the reports from the investigators and from this local district attorney's office. And if the version of the facts that the investigators had to go on was the mother's, was the fact that the father was not home, the fact that the little boy had run out of the house, that I guess my question would be, was there any other caregiver watching the child while the mother purportedly went to check on her father or father-in-law, and while his own father, the decedent's father, wasn't around? I think there are some unanswered questions about who, in that very brief span of time, when the mother didn't have her eyes immediately on the decedent, who was responsible for him, who was watching him, who was supposed to be, and then, of course, who didn't and who wasn't.
Are these kind of cases tough to prosecute? Because you also wonder, would a jury say, you know, parents are human beings, they might be caught up in doing something else, that they didn't intend for this to happen? I mean, that doesn't seem what the charge is suggesting, but would you say a child neglect charge could be tough to prosecute, particularly if that didn't seem to be the outright first conclusion before it was brought to a grand jury?
I do think it would be difficult to prove, especially without some kind of course of conduct. And I believe the medical examiner's report in this case showed no history of other injury or other trauma. So again, when it comes to other physical indicia of abuse or neglect or harm, there was none other than the immediate manner of death in this case, which was the drowning. So without some other circumstances or some other explanation about how or why this child wasn't being watched, wasn't being supervised, and what gave him access to this river where he was later found, I think those are the really pertinent questions that need to be answered.
And I'm curious your thoughts on this as well, because Shamet has pointed out this report that she apparently made of a man standing by two vehicles staring at her and Dane from across the street. This is just before Dane went missing. Now, the sheriff's office pointed out in its news conference that deputies identified this gold 90 station wagon and its owner, ruled out any connection between the car, the driver, and Dane's disappearance. Shamet also claimed that a man had been seen taking photos of trail cameras at a nearby Elks Lodge around 2 weeks before Dane went missing, though what that could have to do with Dane's disappearance specifically, it's not entirely clear, but KPTV reports that information was never provided to police. So this distraught mother also told KPTV that she questions the way the investigation was handled. Quote, "I've asked so many times throughout this entire time, and they're all pretty much been like, I'm reaching, or I'm crazy, or you're some hysterical mother who lives on Siletz Reservation, some native kid. He doesn't matter to them." So Daniel Jackson, who's Dane's uncle, he helped spearhead the search effort for his young nephew. This is per KPTV. He told the outlet that putting Dane in the water could have been a disposal method for some nefarious characters who took him. He said, when you declare day 2 that the main priority is the water and think the child is in the water, if he was kidnapped and people were onto you, you think if you were to get out of this, you probably place the body in the water, right? Now, Professor, there's a lot to break down here, the family talking about this. What are your thoughts?
Well, I would first and foremost encourage the parents, especially the uncharged mother, to perhaps be wary of how much information she shares with the press or says without advice of counsel. It sounds like there could be an argument from the prosecution that there are multiple and competing theories happening from a would-be defense. Like this was a terrible accident. Dane wandered into the river. He was unsupervised momentarily, which happens, unfortunately, in every parent's life. But then at the same time, there were these mysterious and nefarious characters who could have had something to do with Dane's disappearance. Those theories seem to be competing. And so I would, again, question which direction the mother, the parents would have the investigators go in to really get to the bottom of this story. I think also, if there was investigation that was done on the information that the mother shared or the concerns that the mother expressed to the investigators, what the results of that investigation showed should be shared with the public as well, to show why those leads perhaps were not leads at all, or were not followed up on, or why they didn't produce fruitful information for this investigation.
And just to be clear, because of the charge that he's facing, do you think this is a case where they understand what happened, the case closed, there's been an indictment, or do you think they follow up on any of this?
Oh, I do think that they follow up on a lot, if not all of it. I would hope they do, because remember, the phase of the prosecution that goes to the grand jury or to an indicting grand jury is not a guilt phase. The prosecutors do not have a burden at that point beyond a reasonable doubt. If anything, it is essentially a probable cause phase to prove that there is enough evidence to proceed to a trial. And so in the intervening weeks, months, sometimes even years between a grand jury indictment and when a case will see a fact finder, will see either a judge or a jury for a determination as to guilt or not guilt, there very well can be, and should be investigation ongoing into these claims, into the surrounding evidence, the circumstances, and everything else that we still have questions about.
And to be clear about something, Marian Paulsen is not just getting the support from family, or potentially the support from family since he was indicted. He's received some support from the community. There were several comments on the Sheriff's Office Facebook page announcing the indictment, and one person commented, "This is so wrong. They have already paid the ultimate price. This is so wrong." Another wrote, "Feels completely unnecessary. The family suffered enough." Even diver Juan Heredia posted on Facebook that he thinks taking Aaron away from Shamet would be double punishment for a woman who's already lost her 2-year-old son. But then you have a third user who commented, quote, "I find it distasteful to speculate about what happened. There was enough evidence to convince a grand jury to charge the father. He should receive a fair trial and be sentenced appropriately if found guilty." And by the way, according to Oregon sentencing guidelines, a Class A misdemeanor carries a sentence of imprisonment of 364 days, so just under 1 year. Professor, back to you. Obviously, this is just a sampling of what we're seeing in the community, but I always wonder when you see that sampling on social media, and obviously they don't have all the information, they don't have all the evidence, I do wonder if it is a sampling of what a jury could look like or what the difficulties could be in a jury selection process. And particularly if you charge a parent who didn't intentionally kill their child, is it tough to say to a jury, this parent has to be punished despite losing a child? I wonder if that's a difficulty.
It is very difficult. And I think your first point was absolutely spot on, that if you're looking at these social media posts and the reaction on social media, this is a microcosm of what a potential jury pool in Oregon might think or feel, or how they might react to the facts when presented to them if they were impaneled as a jury, if they were seated as a fact finder in this case. So this is essentially a very unscientific but still worthwhile jury focus group, if you will, to see how the community might react to charges like this. So I think it's absolutely valuable information. And it is incredibly difficult to say to a parent, you have already lost a child, you have already suffered an unspeakable loss and devastation. And now to compound that, the community is going to point a finger and say that you did something wrong, and not even something, an act of commission, not even that you affirmatively did something, but that you neglected to do something, that you had a risk, that there was a risk that you were aware of, and you disregarded that risk. So I think that that is ultimately, again, the questions that need to be answered. What did Aaron Paulsen know or should know? What should he have done that he didn't do to safeguard Dane against the risk of the ultimate injury and the ultimate thing that led to his death? And until that question is answered, I'm not sure that the community would have an immediate reaction to point a finger at what could sound like a really devastating accident.
And to be clear, look, you look at that third commentator, I mean, there's a good point. I mean, there was enough evidence to at least charge him. And if it's true that he failed in his duty to Dane, there should be, criminal liability. There should be responsibility there. And it's something interesting. I think I talked about it on a previous Sidebar recently, where in a case like this, would you want parents on the jury, right? Parents might say, well, I can't believe that they're putting this parent through this. This is devastating. They shouldn't be charged. But on the other hand, you might have a parent who say, wait a minute, a caregiver, a parent, they have a responsibility. If they're going to be looking after a child, they should be looking after that child. The parents may actually be the worst person for a defense attorney to have on a jury.
Yeah, I completely agree. So the latter example is something that we teach on called the theory of defensive attribution. We humans tend to separate ourselves from that which is unpleasant, that which is potentially harmful to us or to our loved ones, and we psychologically distance ourselves from it. And we say, well, that wouldn't have happened to me or to mine or to my loved ones because I would have handled things differently. And so I think that is a risk in a case like this with parents on the jury. They would say that child would have never been out of my sight. That child would have never had access to the water or to any entryway to the water. So that wouldn't have happened to me or my family. And of course, hindsight is 20/20, and it's a very powerful place to sit in judgment.
And I just want to go back to something. This is even before we went on air. We were talking how there's a lack of information here. Is that common in a case like this, that we don't have a lot of the evidence, we don't have a lot of the information, we don't know precisely what led to a charge like this? Is that because you're dealing with a minor victim?
Not necessarily. I think every jurisdiction decides how to handle their discovery and how to handle the specifics of the investigation and what to release to the public and what not. I think in this case, the fact that it went before a grand jury might have something to do with it. A lot of jurisdictions who use grand juries to return indictments do so under seal. So it very well could be that the grand jurors in this case who returned the indictment heard evidence that we are not yet privy to and legally not yet permitted to hear. That very well could be the case, but it really depends. If this were a preliminary hearing that were held in open court and not held for a grand jury, the entirety of the transcript and the whole court record would be made available to the public. And so this is just a case where it's not.
Professor Marian Braccia, thank you so much for taking the time. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Jesse. Have a great day.
And that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you should get your podcasts. You can follow me on X or Instagram. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.